Fantastic.
Great. Well, thank you, Jen, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Wes Enicks, and I'm the Executive Director of Generations Incorporated. We have a lot of different individuals, as Jen called out, joining us today. And as you can see in the chat, we have volunteers, we have funders, we have donors, partners, advocates from all across the Generations Incorporated community. So I just want to take a moment to thank you for joining us. You know, and this is a theme that you'll hear today as a part of our town hall. We're trying to harness the power of technology. And this is one of the great ways that we can kind of take advantage of this tool. Hopefully some of you are having a lunch break, eating your lunch at the same time as getting an update from Generations Incorporated. And it's great to be able to pull together we're expecting anywhere of up to 70, 80 people on this town hall today. And so it's great to be able to do so. Just to talk a little bit about an overview of what we'll be covering today. A lot has happened over the past 6 months and for everyone, for all of you, for our entire country and world. And we wanted to talk specifically about how the pandemic and everything that's been going on has impacted Generations Incorporated and how we have adapted through that to shift our programming and to provide our programming virtually to students this school year. So first from the outset, I want to introduce and reintroduce our Deputy Director, Jen Bowen Flynn, who is my co-host today. Jen joined Generations Incorporated just about a year ago in a newly created Deputy Director role, in which she oversees all of our programmatic operations. So that includes recruitment, training, all of our program sites and field service operations, as well as our literacy curriculum and content. And we're extremely fortunate to have Jen as a member of the team. I'm going to turn it over to her in a second to introduce herself, but I don't think either of us could have foreseen the year that would be ahead when she was interviewing for this position about a year ago. This must all fall under other duties as assigned, as we like to say, but we're very fortunate to have her. And as you'll hear through the conversation today, Jen has really done a tremendous job leading our transition and the new program that we're offering to our students here and now. So Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Wes. As Wes mentioned, it will be a year next month since I joined Generations Incorporated. So a little bit about me. For the last 20 plus years, I've worked in the nonprofit and philanthropic sector, most recently in leadership roles with City Year and the Clinton Foundation, Social Venture Partners International. And really the through line for all of those roles was working with organizations that address the opportunity gap and that offer community members a chance to serve. So I've led organizational development and strategy work and program development for years. And so when I learned about applying that background to help kids learn how to read and help engage our older adults at Generations Incorporated, I said, sign me up. So, as I get further along in my career, I realized that all the alignment in the world regarding mission fit and experience fit really doesn't make a heap of difference unless you're doing it with people you appreciate and respect and trust and generally enjoy spending your day with. And so I can say how fortunate I feel to be working alongside of Wes and the other amazing folks at Generations.
Great. Thank you, Jen. So wanted to start today by going back to March, going back to the March 11th, actually, which is the day in which we suspended our in-person programming and made that unprecedented decision and what felt like an unprecedented decision at the time. And we did that out of an abundance of caution and for the safety of all the participants in our program. Following that decision, we transitioned quickly to really focusing first and foremost on the needs of our volunteers, understanding that they were predominantly in the high risk category related to COVID-19. We wanted to ensure that they were not overly isolated, that they had access to the resources that they needed, whether that be food or other resources, especially in the March, April time frame when things were really shut down and access to resources was more of a challenge. Our program staff did check-ins with each individual volunteer on a regular basis We also continue to hold team meetings. So at each one of our program sites, we have a group of volunteers who work at that site supporting students' literacy development. And so we continue to hold individual site team meetings more as a support to each other, a check-in to see how everyone is doing and make sure that they're doing well and staying safe. I would say that the programming that we offered from March through the end of last school year in June was a patchwork of support and looked a little bit different depending on the school or the after-school programming. We did have volunteers who joined Google Classrooms to provide support to teachers or students as a part of literacy blocks. We had recorded read-alouds that were shared with partners, online materials and other literacy resources. And then, as you'll hear a little bit more about, towards the end of the school year, we began piloting our virtual program that we are now implementing at full scale in a few strategic locations so that we could learn from that process. Organizationally, we took on developing an 18-month plan. As a leadership team, as a board, and as an organization, we wanted to be very transparent and upfront about what our ultimate goals were in a really unprecedented time. And so we said, as a part of this 18-month plan, we want to ensure that at the end of 18 months, so what that would be from when we began the plan, the beginning of what would be next school year. So the beginning of the 21-22 school year, which would be about a year from now, that we're still in existence. We're still operating. We're still providing our programming to students and providing our structured literacy interventions. And everything that we've done and continue to do is working back from that point. So one of the first things that we did is we cut $40,000 of non-essential expenses as a precautionary measure, not knowing what the financial or funding landscape would look like or what would happen to the economy. And really wanted to make sure that we were remaining financially stable as an organization as we continued through these times. Suspending our district expansion plans was another part of what we did. So at the beginning of last fiscal year, so about a year and a half ago now, our fiscal year runs from July to June, we launched a new strategic plan called Read to Grow. A big part of that plan was looking to expand our programming to a new school district in about a year from now. Once the pandemic set in, we made the decision as an organization to put that expansion on hold to really focus on our current programming and operations. I'll talk a little bit more about it later in our programming, but we are in the midst of reevaluating that expansion and looking at expansion once again. As we continued along in the spring, I think that we quickly began to realize, certainly given the high risk to our volunteer population and how things were progressing with the pandemic, that we would need to provide our programming virtually in this school year, the 2021 school year, in order to provide programming to students and to provide support to our partners. And so I think that we probably made that decision quicker than most. I think that we were in a position where, because of that high risk, we needed to start thinking about that and imagining that. And the way in which we felt about it as an organization was, we know what to do in regular times. We know what to do with our in-school and in-person programming. What we don't know is what a virtual program could look like that we know is driving literacy outcomes for students. And so we spent our time really focused on developing that model and developing that implementation. I joined a national task force. So as many of you know, and just as a reminder, we are an affiliate of a national conglomerate of organizations as a part of AARP Foundation Experience Corps. So there are 22 other organizations throughout the country in other cities or locations that are doing similar work to us. And so I joined a task force. There were 3 leaders of those 22 organizations, myself, a representative from California, another from Minneapolis, as well as national foundation and experience corps staff. And we really focused on looking at the platform and the implementation of a virtual program. So what were going to be the tools and resources that we used as a part of this implementation? There are a lot of integrated education softwares that can be used remotely as a part of implementing a virtual program and literacy intervention such as ours. The part of the challenge is really finding that fit as closely to our model and program, and that had the integration of the curriculum as well as the audio video interface. And that is at the time, and there's still not a lot out there that really has those two integrated well. And you're going to hear a little bit more about where we landed in a minute when I turn it over to Jen to go through the details of our virtual program model. But those were things that we worked on as a national task force, and then also locally at Generations Incorporated as a part of our development. As I mentioned, we did pilot using Zoom education, our intervention in the springtime as well as during the summer. We had some volunteers who are working with students during the summer and towards the end of the school year. And we learned tremendously from that experience that helped inform our process moving forward. And so I am going to turn it over to Jen now to talk through the specifics of our virtual program.
Terrific. Thanks, Wes. I am going to share about our virtual program. I'm going to talk to you about our existing volunteer corps and the recruitment of new volunteers and training, but I'm going to do all of that in a moment because now I want to recognize that it is 12:16 according to my clock. And one of the things that we've done as part of our transition to virtual is better understand the virtual environment and the best practices surrounding conditions for success in a virtual environment. So I have a question for you all. Okay, ready? Get ready to put something into the chat here. How long do you think adults can maintain their focus in a virtual environment? So in the chat box right now, take a guess how many minutes you think an adult can maintain their focus in a virtual environment. All right, I see 17, I see 20, 25, 60, 20, 25, 10 to 15, 20, an hour. Look at that, some great guesses here. 25, 37, 8. Okay, I'm not going to leave you in suspense here. The range is actually between 7 and 15 minutes. The research gives a range and it varies a little bit, but the range is about 7 to 15 minutes. So we're at about the 15-minute mark. We're going to change it up a little bit. You should know that for children, it is far less. So as we are thinking about tutoring kids online, we are thinking very hard about how do we keep them engaged. And so we've researched and are training our staff and our volunteers on what we're calling Zumba activities. So what is Zumba? Zumba is an acronym meaning Zoom break activities. So Zumbas give our volunteers when they're in meetings or trainings, or students when they're in a tutoring session, the chance to change their pace, a chance to recharge, an opportunity to use their brain or their body in a different way. So they can come back to the activity that they were doing renewed and refreshed. So that question I just asked you was a Zumba because it got you engaged and thinking and doing. I've got another one for you. You all know we are a literacy organization, so of course we need to ask you something having to do with books. So please use the chat feature and share a book that you're currently reading or recently read that you'd recommend to the group. So again, use that chat feature now. Give us the title of a book that you recommend. The Boys of Summer, The Warmth of Other Suns, White Fragility, any Clive Cussler book, Becoming, that one is Michelle Obama, The Lying Life of Adults, that sounds intriguing, Born a Crime, The Splendid and the Vile, 5 People You Meet in Heaven. Toni Morrison, Beloved. Fantastic. You all take take a chance to have a look if you're looking for any good reads. I know we all may have more time on our hands now than in the past. There's some great ones on that list there. Thank you for sharing. So as Wes mentioned, starting in the late spring, early summer, we really turned our focus to thinking and planning for virtual programs. I'm going to chat with you a little bit about that now. We looked both at our literacy model and virtual adaptations with a few fundamental goals in mind. So I'm going to walk you through those goals. First, we wanted to ensure literacy continuity with students at a time of education disruption. This crisis has set back kids who were already struggling to read by months. So literacy continuity. The next is we wanted to provide deep impact. We want to move the literacy needle with kids who need the extra support. And we have the proven program, and we wanted to use that to adapt for a virtual space. So continuity and deep impact. The next is, to Wes's point, the reason why we closed down our program earlier than many others has to do with ensuring the safety of our community of volunteers, but also the students and teachers and schools. Next goal was flexibility and the ability to pivot quickly. There are many variables happening right now with schools and school launching. If any of you have seen the news, Boston Public Schools has delayed the move to hybrid by an additional week. We wanted to make sure that we were able to pivot and to serve kids regardless of whether or not they're in-person, hybrid, or fully remote. And then the last piece is we wanted to remove some of the administrative burden and support required by our partners. So we took all of those goals and used those to really as guiding principles for our new program. So first, our program will be one-to-one. So one student, one coach. This is similar to aspects of our program that we've run in our after-school program at Boys and Girls Club and our one-to-one reading coach programs. We know this program, we do this program well. They will be very structured sessions, 30 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week. And we see this move to one-to-one as opposed to smaller groups of 2 or 3 students as necessary in going virtual. The ability for our volunteers to individualize the attention with students and have deeper impact will result from the one-to-one. And it also gives our volunteers the ability to manage those sessions online. So the first piece is the one-to-one. The next, we're going to focus on working with 1st to 3rd grade students. In the past, we've worked with kindergartners, but we believe we'll have the most success working with students who have basic principles of letter identification and print concepts, the idea that letters are symbols and that letters represent sound and that you read from left to right and top to bottom. These are all things that are taught in kindergarten. We also will allow our coaches, to be partnered with students that they've worked with in the past year when it's possible, and they can have that continuity of an established relationship and a caring adult in their life. Okay, one-to-one, 1st to 3rd grade. The next piece is we will be adopting Reading A to Z. It's a nationally recognized early literacy program. It's a structured, leveled reading library with curriculum, and it has a strong online component. All of those things went into helping us decide to move forward with that piece. We think this is critical for freeing up teachers' time so that they can focus their full time and attention into the classroom and the students that need them, and not on supporting and directing our volunteers. So we know that teachers have tons on their plates. We've all been watching the news and hearing about the struggle of getting school up and off of the ground. And that will be especially true and continues to be especially true this fall and through the winter. So this move allows us to remove administrative burden from our teachers. Then the last piece is we've developed really strong oversight practices. Wes talked a little bit about a learning management system. We've moved that in-house and created our own intranet, if you will, that houses all of the things from the digital books to the Zoom links, to schedules, to contact information. Anything a volunteer could possibly need will be housed on what we're calling the GI link, or the link. We will maintain oversight of our sessions and manage the schedules and the logistics. And we also consider safety to be a priority. So we've put together a monitoring policy that ensures regular safety monitoring of all sessions. As part of that oversight practices, we will have regular oversight of our program staff with literacy coaches to make sure there's fidelity to our literacy model and that they're receiving regular real-time coaching to course correct and ensure that they're really delivering on the model that we've spent a lot of time putting together and training on. So those are the components of the program. There are a couple important points about that though. One, I want to highlight that it's deeply flexible because we are going to be using Zoom. It allows us the ability to adapt to whatever the school setup is over the course of the fall and the coming year as the schedule may shift between fully virtual to hybrid and perhaps toggling back and forth between those. And it gives us the ability to work with students, whether they're in school or home, during any hours of the school day. Secondly, in addition to being flexible, we see this as not just a thing we're doing for 2020 to 2020 through 2021. This is really a long-term enhancement for us in our program. As soon as it's safe for us to be back in person, we have every intentions of being back in the schools and in our after-school programs. But we won't cast aside this virtual program when we're back in person. We see virtual coaches as a terrific pool of potential substitutes during the winter months when coaches may be home with colds or caring for loved ones, or an opportunity for a literacy coach who's concerned about driving in inclement weather. And we know we have lots of that in the greater Boston area. So having a robust pool of coaches who can jump in virtually when need be means that there's no gap in service for kids. So we feel really good about the fact that we're at a place where we can both offer this virtually as during this time of physical distancing and unsurety in our schools, but also have long-term plans for it as well. Okay. I'm going to pause there for a second. Wes, before I launch into talking a little bit about recruitment and training, any pieces that I missed on that front or things you want to highlight?
No, I think you covered it. One thing that I will kind of chime in and mention is, Jen spoke to the use of Zoom education. We've purchased over 150 Zoom education licenses for all of our volunteers. We have purchased DocuSign as a tool to streamline our volunteer paperwork, given the remote work. That's also what we're going to be using for parent permissions to make it ease of use for parents to sign off on their child or participating in our program. And we have purchased Chromebooks for volunteers who may not have access to technology to participate, to ensure that access to a computer is not a barrier to their participating in our program. And all of that wouldn't be possible without the tremendous support that we've had from funders and donors. And so I just want to say that, especially because there are many that are on this call today. And so our ability to kind of make those shifts and to take on those tools that are really going to enhance our program and streamline our operations wouldn't be possible without that support. So we're really grateful for that.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate you chiming in about that piece. Okay, we're at the 12:30 mark, so we're going to do another really quick Zumba. You guys ready? Okay, if you're sitting in your chair, sit up straight, spine straight, hands in your lap. If you're standing, same. This is to get the blood flowing a little bit. When you spend a lot of time in front of a computer, our postures take the toll, and so let's stretch out our neck and shoulders a bit. Now drop your head to the right and feel the stretch, and now to the left and feel the stretch. Some neck circles front to back, and then reverse direction, back to front. We're going to do a little shoulder here. Circle your right shoulder back and try to touch your shoulder to your ear. Now bring it forward, try to touch your shoulder to your ear. And the left one. And forward, reverse direction. And now both together, forward and back. as you can imagine, when you have 7 or 8-year-old who are getting a little squirmy, shifting their focus, letting them get their wiggles out, letting them get their blood flowing again is just good practice to let them refocus and have the energy to get back onto reading. Okay. The last few things I want to share about our shift has been with regards to our recruitment for new literacy coaches and our training efforts. First, I want to share that we had 75% of our volunteers from last year return to serve again this year. Given the pandemic and the move to virtual, we are really just thrilled at this outpouring of continued support. I'm also pleased to share that we've brought on, in the process of bringing on and training, 70 new volunteers to join our program virtually as literacy coaches this fall. As you can imagine, with the health crisis and physical distancing requirements, the closing of many community events, our typical outreach methods have just not been available to us. So all the more reason we're grateful to our long-standing relationship with AARP of Massachusetts. Thanks to a huge postcard mailing that they did, newsletter outreach, social media postings by AARP of Massachusetts about our program, we had one of the most successful recruitment seasons of all time. We're finding that the current state of the world is making community members feel the need to get involved and give back, and creating space and availability for folks to get involved in ways that maybe they weren't able to before. Virtual means not having to fight traffic or find parking and not leaving your homes, and those factors have really freed up more individuals to volunteer with us. So we're really excited to get those folks started. And what does it mean to get started? So the first step is training. As you can imagine, shifting to a virtual model means quite a lift for us organizationally in terms of training our volunteer corps. We received support, as Wes mentioned, from the AARP Foundation Experience Corps. That national office put together a wonderful training series for us on the literacy model. And we have supplemented with technology and Zoom training, cultural responsiveness training, and practice sessions, so our coaches feel confident and ready to go without missing a beat this fall. And then, in terms of utilizing best practices, as far as virtual training is concerned, we're training in cohorts of 30. So we started in mid-September. We have a little less than half, about half or so of our core trained up, and we will continue through the end of this month. So Wes, again, I'll turn it over to you to see if there are pieces that you want to add with regards to recruitment and training.
No, I'll just add that, as you may imagine, adapting training to the virtual setting is no small lift. And, I think with the tremendous support of Experience Corps nationally, as well as our team locally, did a great job really getting everything set up. And all of the volunteers who have been through training so far have just really said how spot on they thought it was, how prepared they feel for this virtual program. And I think it's a great sign for as we get started in this new year.
Great, Wes, I'll turn it back to you then.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, and thank you for sharing all of that and all the detail. There are a few other things wanted to share with you and update you on, and then we're gonna turn it over to questioning and answering. We already do have some questions in the Q&A, which is wonderful. As Jen mentioned at the outset, in your bottom toolbar next to the chat, there's a Q&A with a couple of bubbles. Please feel free to put any questions in there, because we look forward to answering your questions and kind of hearing from you what you want to learn or hear more about. First and foremost, regarding our partners for this year, we're going to be starting in 8 Boston public schools. We are looking right now like we are going to have sessions beginning by the end of next week or the following week. As you can imagine, the delayed start for Boston public schools, as well as the potential shift to hybrid or not, is making things very challenging for each individual school. They have a lot on their plate as they're getting teachers and students up to speed on virtual learning. And so we're working with each individual school to set our schedules and to begin to implement our virtual programming. We have historically worked with Revere Public Schools for 11 years. We have a tremendous partnership with Revere Public Schools. In conversations with them over the spring and summer, though they feel tremendously strong about our partnership and our program, given all of the other factors that they were dealing with as a district, they felt like they just couldn't start with the program at the beginning of the year. They wanted to understand what things would look like for them in a virtual environment. And so we are going to be revisiting conversations with Revere the end of this month, beginning of November, for the potential of starting programming, virtual programming with them at the beginning of the 2021 calendar year. And so we remain hopeful for that, but we certainly understand all that is on their plate and that they are going through as a district. We also work with Boys and Girls Club of Boston for after-school programming. We have worked in 3 of the Boys and Girls Clubs, many of them which we've worked with for over 20 years. They are going through a lot themselves. They remain kind of in a shuffle to terms of understanding how they are serving and supporting their students. Certainly, you know, in normal times, students are coming from Boston Public Schools to those clubs after school for Boys and Girls Club programming, with schools being remote now and then potentially being hybrid. They're still adapting to what their support looks like for their students. Additionally, given some national Boys and Girls Club policies that they have related to monitoring, Jen spoke to our monitoring policy of always having an additional adult in every single session. The clubs currently have a policy of a club staff member needing to be a part of virtual sessions. And so as you can imagine, from a staffing standpoint, that makes it difficult for the clubs to support that on an ongoing basis. And so we remain in contact with the club directors. We're hopeful that we can put together some level of support or programming for those club students in the virtual setting before we certainly return to in-person programming at each one of the clubs eventually. I wanted to, and we both Jen and I will talk a little bit about this, talk about our work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, because this is a pillar of our organization and something that is extremely important to us at Generations Incorporated. And I'm going to go back actually about 2 years ago. We began as an organization with the objective to broaden our understanding of issues and concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and work towards making Generations Incorporated an anti-racist, multicultural institution. So starting in December of 2018, our staff went through an implicit bias training with an external facilitator. From there, we spent the past year plus on diving deeper into staff shared understanding of DEI terms. As an organization, we implemented a formal compensation philosophy to ensure equitable pay for all staff and new hiring practices that would limit implicit bias in our hiring process and recruit a more diverse applicant pool. The work of Generations Incorporated has never been solely about literacy. We are deeply rooted in the community and our commitment to breaking down barriers to student success. And we know the largest and most pronounced barrier remains systemic racism and inequality. We are in the process of forming a formal committee of staff, volunteers, and board to set organizational policies on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ensure oversight and accountability so that the policies are enacted. Our board of directors will be going through a consultant-led DEI training in November. And then we have also worked with Visions Inc. recently to develop a cultural responsiveness training for our volunteers, which we just began to implement with our volunteers during this training period. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk a little bit more about that cultural responsiveness training.
Great, thanks, Wes. So as Wes mentioned, we've prioritized inviting volunteers to join us in this DEI journey this fall. This cultural responsiveness workshop we designed with Visions and external consultants for volunteers this summer. At this point, we have about half of our volunteer corps that has been through the training at this time and have received really some terrific feedback. The workshop provides a forum and a safe and supportive space to discuss things like DEI terms, explore potential biases volunteers and students may have in sessions, and provide volunteers with tools and the opportunity to practice how to enter into dialogue across differences. Given where we are as a country in terms of the pandemic and the national dialogue around injustice and inequities, these have been very timely conversations and ones that the volunteers have really appreciated being part of. And we plan to use this workshop really as a springboard for continued dialogue over the course of the year.
Great, thank you, Jen. It looks like we already have some great questions in the Q&A, and so what we will do now is we'll transition to the questions. To answer all of those, please continue to add questions that you may have. So we'll just kind of start from the top, and Jen, you and I can kind of ping pong these back and forth. The first question for Bill Hannigan is, how are you coordinating student participation with BPS scheduling? Jen, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We're working directly with principals to understand what their school schedule looks like, and understanding what that would look like hybrid as well as virtual, and plugging in our tutoring sessions based on the literacy block for a particular school, the asynchronous time. So new word, I think that many of us have heard in the last 6 months and maybe have never used ever before that, which is asynchronous is time when children are in learning, but are not necessarily doing it coordinated with the teacher during specific classroom time. So during their literacy block or asynchronous time. And teachers are referring students that are behind benchmark in terms of their literacy and could really benefit from having a one-on-one tutor. So that is something that we're working really closely with principals on and is a work in progress. And we're getting to a place with each of the schools where we have schedules put together and hope to be finalized with that process within the next week or so.
And many of the schools just completed their own schedules. And so given kind of the uncertainty of whether they were going to be in person, hybrid, or virtual, a lot of our partner schedules for themselves were not set until this past week or two. So we're in that process of setting our own schedules with those students. The next question from Libby Blank is about, how do you get teaching materials and books to kids and coaches? I can take that one. Great question, Libby. The Reading A to Z curriculum has online resources and tools, and so all of the books are accessible virtually. And so one of the things that we have done is we have taken a tool that we had in existence and kind of totally reworked and enhanced it. And that is our password protected Google site, the GI link, which houses resources for our program and volunteers. Through that site, we already have, I'm going to look to you, Jen, I think it's hundreds of titles and books in both fiction and nonfiction for each reading level uploaded. And so a volunteer will be able to easily go to the student reading level, select the book, and then through the use of the Zoom, they will be sharing their screen to walk the student through the book so that the student and the volunteer, will be going through the book at the same time, seeing the same thing as a part of the content. So that's related to all materials that are virtually accessible and will be a part of the program. Additionally, we are pursuing through our partners at Experience Corps the possibility at some point in the program year of getting physical book copies out to students and volunteers. We know that nothing can replace the value of a physical book, and that's something that's important to us. As you can imagine, there are some logistical aspects related to that, especially in times of a pandemic, in getting those resources to students and volunteers. So as an organization, we wanted to get things set up and people trained on the virtual setting first, and then try and tackle how we can get physical books into people's hands. Anything to add to that, Jen?
I think you got it.
All right. So the next question is, what is the composition of the new virtual volunteer cohort this year? How many are new versus returning from traditional reading coaches program? I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, Jen, but do you want to dive into that again?
Yeah, sure. We have about 35% of our volunteer core that will be new. And so that would be about 65% that are returning.
Great. And Doug Dixon, partners over at Encore, asking what provision is being made for access to broadband service for students and volunteers who lack it? Great question, Doug. This is something we've thought a lot about in a conversation we're having currently. I mentioned earlier about our purchasing and securing of additional Chromebooks for use by our volunteers, but also potentially by our school partners if needed. The district has actually done a really good job of providing Chromebooks to all students who need them. And but one of the challenges we've been talking to our schools about is that if they are in a hybrid setting, the schools want the students to leave their Chromebooks at home. They don't want them to come back and forth and potentially break, or they get lost, etc., wear and tear. And so in some situations, there may be where we are pushing Chromebooks into a classroom for students in a school setting. Not to say that that will happen, but we just want to be prepared for if it does. Related to broadband into internet access, we did just receive a technology grant. And so one of the things we're looking at is those volunteers who may have some internet or broadband needs and potential of securing hotspots. Related to the students, that is something that is primarily in the district hand. They do have resources that they have been communicating to families that have those needs. And so that is predominantly being addressed by their individual schools and districts overall. Jen, do you want to take this next one about Richard Noonan asking how many students are in our program now?
Sure. So as we continue to bring on new volunteers and get them through the training, we're expecting around 170-ish volunteers. That may grow a bit or shrink a little bit over the course of the coming month or so as we get folks through training. So based on that, we're looking at serving about 500 students over the course of this year. As we talked about, we've shifted from that small group model where we were serving 2 to 3 or 4 students to doing this one-on-one. And so we're excited that those volunteers will be able to take on about 3, sometimes 4 students a piece in order to tutor them throughout the year, bringing us to about 500 students.
And certainly if we do end up working in Revere Public Schools or developing programming with the Boys and Girls Clubs, at some point this year with our virtual program, we would look for that number to increase, but we would be serving all of those students one-to-one as well. Does the move to virtual service delivery shift the qualifications you look for in recruiting new volunteers? Jen, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question, and one we spent a lot of time thinking about as an organization, our program and recruitment staff. And one of the things that we really landed on was the major qualification shift has to do with a level of comfort with technology. We believe that we can, and we have been training on sort of the specifics of Zoom and how you can share your screen and how you access and download a PDF version of a book. How do you ensure that your video is on and off, how you might troubleshoot a child who might be struggling a little bit with technology. We believe strongly we can train towards that, but we also feel like our volunteers needed to come in with a baseline level and comfort with technology so that they knew what a browser was and how to open up their browser so they could access Zoom for the first time, and knew what a PDF was and potentially how to download a PDF. So we did certainly have conversations with volunteers with regards to what would be be expected of them as far as their technology skills were concerned, and then what we would be able to offer them in terms of technology support and training. So I would say that was really the major shift in terms of qualifications. I will add the caveat of we've had these conversations as well with our returning volunteers, not just our new volunteers. And we asked our volunteers in June if they were planning on returning in September, and we were overwhelmed with the responses of yes, we are planning on coming back. But the interesting thing was we kept hearing them say, like, if you had asked me in March, no way would I have said yes. But the exposure to Wes's point, moving to doing Zoom site team meetings and regular check-ins with our staff via Zoom really helped them build their confidence and realize, oh, actually, I think I can do this. So that sort of level of technology comfort has been really a through line through all of this. For those volunteers who haven't felt comfortable, we have a plan in place to continue to keep them engaged over the course of the year. They were just invited to participate in a forum tomorrow. We will continue to keep them engaged over the course of the year in hopes of being back in person next September, where we can, welcome them with open arms.
And the only thing I'll just add is, Jen touched on it, is just, the incredible volunteers that we have as a part of our organization. And they really are the heart of Generations Incorporated. And, the number of them who said, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to step into the unknown because it's what the students need and it's what the kids need during this unprecedented time. So we're just grateful to all of them, as well as all the new volunteers who are willing to step forward to participate in our program. So this next question is about what are the minimum number of hours required for volunteering, so per week, per day. So Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We have two opportunities. One is a 4-hour a week commitment, which would be 2 hours twice a week, because we see children at minimum of twice a week. So you see them on a Monday and Tuesday, for example. So it would be 2 hours twice a week. The other is our AmeriCorps opportunity, which are 10 hours per week. And we've been in partnership with AmeriCorps for quite a while. The service opportunity allows our volunteers to receive a small living stipend, as well as an education award at the end of their 9 months of service, where that education award can be applied towards higher education or can be passed along to a loved one or family member or grandchild for their higher education. So 4 hours for our regular serving volunteers, and then 10 hours a week for anybody who's interested in an AmeriCorps position.
And I may have missed this, Jen, if you touched on this in terms of and this came up in a question later, current availability for interested volunteers.
So right now for our regular serving, the 4-hour volunteer, we are starting a wait list. For our AmeriCorps slots, we are still recruiting for those through the end of this month. So anybody who's interested, and if you know anybody who might be interested in that, please send them our way. In terms of the wait list, we really are going to pause until the end of the month, until we have a sense from schools, that schedule piece that I was telling you about that we hope to have in place within the next week or so. And once they start referring students to us, so we get a sense of what the demand is versus what our available volunteer pool looks like.
Great, thanks, Jen. Next, we have a question from one of our great volunteers, Gancho, at the Blackstone School, who is just asking about support systems for working parents who may have difficulty in scheduling and supporting their children during virtual learning. This is a very understandable question and a challenge that exists within this current virtual setup. And what I can say first and foremost is one of the things that has really appealed to our program partners about our virtual program is the one-to-one aspect and us working virtually with one-to-one, because one of the things that they've said that they've heard resoundingly from families is the students missing that one-to-one support in this virtual learning that they've had in the spring and into this year. And so with that one-to-one, there is a little less, kind of support that a parent or guardian or adult would need to provide. Certainly someone would need to be present, within the home or the room, but the volunteer is able to kind of maintain the connection with the student through that curriculum during that session, because they are working with them one-to-one. In terms of supports, it really is working through the individual schools. Each one of them have individual family support and outreach staff. And so understanding, what work they're doing and information they're sharing in this regard, and how we can support that, and how we can get behind the efforts of the schools to best support families during this tremendously difficult time. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Jen.
I think that covers it.
Great. The next question is from Phil Siegel, and she is asking, what is the difference between Zoom education and the Zoom we are using now? So the differences in terms of the tools are pretty minimal. There are some specific tools that are in Zoom education that are not in regular Zoom Enterprise, but by and large, it's more about the cost aspect. So with Zoom education, schools as well as organizations that are directly serving students can receive a discounted cost as a part of it. And so that's been a cost saver for us to use Zoom education as a tool. They continue, as you can imagine, the amount of people and schools and entities that are using Zoom now, and the way in which it's being used. Zoom continues to regularly provide enhancements and updates, and they have a team specifically focused on education to understand what are the tools that organizations such as ours need within Zoom to be most effective and to work with students. So that's by and large. I don't know if there's some other things that you can speak to, Jen. One of the things that I will say that is great is that through administrative tools of Zoom, we can, as a staff, work on the back end to really help problem solve and troubleshoot volunteers or students that may be having some connectivity issues, maybe having some challenges with their connection or with their Zoom meeting. And so the administrative back end tools as a part of it really allow for us to provide some tremendous support to the virtual program. We touched on this, but it was about asking if we were looking for volunteers still. So as Jen mentioned, we are on a waiting list for 4-hour, twice weekly volunteers. And then we do still have AmeriCorps slots, which are 10-hour per week volunteer slots. So can you comment on how your approach to virtual programming compares to efforts by other organizations you may know about? So I think that's a great question. I think there's a lot of moving parts, and we've been kind of internally focused a lot in terms of what we need to be effective and to implement our tools. And so I think certainly I and our team continue to learn what others are doing. I think one of the things that has been a roadblock for many is the monitoring piece, right? And so through our virtual model, we will have 2 adults present in every single session. One who is the literacy coach and one whose screen is off and sound is off, who is simply a monitor for safety and other precautions for both the child and the volunteer. That takes a significant lift of people power. And so I know in talking to many organizations, that's been a challenge in terms of determining how best to address that aspect. I think the other is kind of depending on what the organization's core focus is with students and how it's operated. Whether, a lot of organizations are working with groups of students. Our classroom-based model previously worked with 3 to 4 students at a time. And so that's a big part of why we've shifted to one-to-one, just because working with groups of students virtually, not to say that some aren't doing it and some aren't approaching that, it does create more significant challenges. But I think we'll learn more. We're sharing and learning from each other. I know Boston Partners in Education is on the call. They're a great partner of ours in the field that we collaborate and learn from. And so I think, one of the other great things about our industry and field is that we're all trying to support each other and learn from each other, about best practices and about tools to best support students during this time. How will you be able to track the effectiveness of this new model? Great question. Do you want to touch on that, Jen?
Sure, I'd be happy to. One of the aspects of this model is there are many components of literacy. The components that we will be focusing on specifically are fluency. Fluency has to do with reading as you speak and the sort of accuracy of your ability to read. Fluency is often talked about as the bridge to comprehension. So as kids are learning about phonics and phonemic awareness and blends and consonants and vowel sounds and all of those things, they may be saying a word, but may not necessarily be internalizing what it means. And that's the comprehension side of things. And fluency is really seen as a bridge from getting kids to that place of sort of building their skills to understanding what they're reading. And what we're seeing is that teachers often don't have the time to spend one-on-one with kids, to listen to them, to give them the opportunity to have text in front of them, to be reading out loud, to be praising them when they're doing well, to be correcting them quickly when they are not. And ensuring that they get miles on the tongue, if you will. So this focus of ours will be focused on fluency and vocabulary and comprehension. That being said, we will be doing assessments of our kids the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year. FAST, DIBBLES, for any of you who are in the literacy world, it's a standard literacy test. A DIBBLES oral reading fluency assessment. So that will give us the baseline at the beginning of the year where a student is, and then we'll be able to track them over the course of the middle of the year and end of the year to understand our progress with kids and the effectiveness, to your point, over the course of the year. It will also allow us to take a look at the middle of the year and do some course correction if we see that we're not getting the traction that we want, or be able to really celebrate if we are. So that is a new piece of our program that we will be implementing, and we're sort of putting the final touches on what that looks like as we speak.
Great. I want to recognize that it is the top of the hour. We do have a few remaining questions, and so we'll stay on the line to answer those questions, but I do want to recognize for those that may need to hop off for other meetings or other things. I just want to thank all of you for joining us for this town hall. We are looking this as a tool that we can use moving forward to keep in touch with you, to share the work of Generations Incorporated. One of the things we've talked about is in the next couple of months or at the beginning of the calendar year, having a few of our volunteers who have conducted the virtual program join for a town hall to share their experience and everything that they've been doing as a part of the program. So thank you to all of you for your support, and we will continue to be in touch. And with that, we will turn back to the Q&A and answer a few of these last questions. The next one is a question about the economic impact of the pandemic and how it's affected the organization's progress in the strategic plan, and kind of what the immediate funding needs are of the funding community for the organization. There are a few things that I'll speak to in that regard. I think first and foremost is we exist to provide literacy support and social emotional support to the students we serve. And so that is our core mission, and that is what we are focused on. And so in these times, we didn't want financials to be a barrier to us serving students. And so what I mean by that is a portion of our revenue comes from school fees, and that covers a portion of the total cost to operate within any given partner. As you can imagine, given the pandemic in these times, many school budgets and individual budgets have been impacted. And we made clear to partners that maybe we're having some financial challenges, that we didn't want that to be a barrier, and that we'd work with them to find a way to have programming and to move forward. And so, I think the financial support from foundations as well as individuals allows us to really do that, and to be able to offer that support to students, and continuing that support so that we can make sure that the financial limitations is not a barrier to a partner working with us, especially during these times. Because as we say, as a partner, and many of these are longtime partners of ours, we want to be there for them when the times get tough and when the going gets tough. We don't want to just go away because there's, all these things that they're facing. We need to be there with them, supporting their students. In terms of the strategic plan, we are in year 2 of a program that's called Leading for Impact through Bridgespan, which is a nonprofit consulting group. In year 1 last year, our leadership team went through a series of coursework and in-person sessions to learn on effective leadership. And we took on an organization project with the support of consultants where we looked at process mapping in the organization and how we are implementing process mapping as a part of our work. In year 2, which we're just beginning now, we are going to be relooking at our growth and expansion. So relooking at that potential growth to a new district, or whether that's individual schools, or how we look to the virtual program as a potential for growth. And so out of that, we are going to be building out our new expansion and growth strategies. And certainly there will be funding that we will be looking for to help support that expansion and growth. And then the last piece that I'll just say in the current here and now, and I'm mentioning this because the question was asked, that we have a generous donor who has offered a $10,000 match as a part of our back to school fundraising appeal. You can learn more on our website. And we are in the midst of trying to raise $10,000 that will be matched dollar for dollar up to $10,000. So for anyone who is generously looking to support us, that's a great way to support us in this time and allow us to maximize those dollars. There's a couple questions here, Jen, about monitors. Do you want to kind of touch on that?
Sure. So our volunteers who are our literacy coaches will also be monitors. We will also have staff and our site team leaders supporting as monitors along the way as well. So in order to volunteer with us this year, you agree to support students in multiple ways. 1, by being an actual tutor yourself or a literacy coach, and 2, by being that monitor. So we have put together, you can imagine the algorithm behind that of how many sessions does someone need to tutor versus monitor in order to make that all align, and we're in the process of putting that together. But yes, for sure, our volunteers are also serving as monitors, as well as when needed, staff if we need to pop in.
Great. And then there's a question from Libby Blank about writing and drawing. Do you want to touch a little bit on the whiteboard or chalkboard and how we, what role writing or drawing may play within the virtual program?
Sure. Zoom has a feature that has a whiteboard that will allow for drawing using a mouse pad or writing using a mouse pad. And we have trained and will continue to train our volunteers on how to go about using that. As you can imagine, in a virtual space, that writing and drawing in a 30-minute session is harder to do and harder to manage from a volunteer perspective. If a child is working at their desk, you can't necessarily see the work that they're doing. So that has been a focus in our in-person work, will continue to be a focus in our in-person work, but less so in the virtual space, just by virtue of it being virtual.
Great. Well, I think that sums it up for the questions. Really great questions. We appreciate you all joining us. We appreciate your time and your continued support. And I know the saying is a bit overused, but I think it's tremendously true that it takes a village. And this point in time, with everything that has been going on with the pandemic, this shift to virtual, this way in which we're going to be supporting and serving students, it takes a village. It takes our volunteers, our staff, our funders, our supporters, our advocates, our partners, and just grateful for all of you being a part of the Generations Incorporated community. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to the Generations Incorporated staff who have done a truly tremendous job. Every single staff member has been laser focused on one thing, and that's what we need to do to serve students and support volunteers. And that has made all of this work that we've done possible, because we're all heading in the same direction. And so just want to say a thank you to Jen and the entire staff for all of their commitment and work. And then I'll just close with, we have recorded this session, and so we will be sharing that recording for anyone that you know who may be interested in hearing what we had to say today and learning a little bit more about where we are as an organization and program right now. And as we said, we look forward to keeping you posted. We're just diving into our virtual program and literacy sessions here in the coming weeks, and we look forward to sharing the progress and how things go.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.